All right, we're going to perform depth probe calibration. It's important to perform this periodically to ensure that the depth probes are reading the inset, how deep the spacer is below the edge of the glass. If that is not calibrated properly, it's either going to put way too much or too little sealant in. So you're going to have to run a unit down with whatever spacer. That's not so important. Measure your inset. So about 2.2, 0.199. Yep. So measure it, write it down. 200. Measure the trailing end. Sorry. Measure it a couple times. So about 165. $220. Once 180. When you write the bottom measurement down, don't write it at the bottom because the suction cups will cover it and you won't be able to see it. Okay. So write it up here. Now that you have your 4 measurements, a side note, when you do this, we are running steel nozzles. You want to make sure your nozzles are relatively damage-free. If you're running plastic nozzles, or nozzle shoes like the plastic ones, put new ones on before you do this. So we have our glass here on this conveyor, sealer 1. We have our 4 measurements. We can come over to here, and you will have to have power on inside the gate when you do this. We've got a parameter screen. Turn the sealant off. Then we'll go to main screen. We'll go to line data. Make sure our data for the piece of glass we're running is on sealer 1, which it is. Then we're going to hit step, start, parameter screen, depth probes. When you do this calibration, it is unique per nozzle size. So you have small, medium, large, small triples and large triples. So ideally you should be periodically doing this on each nozzle set you run, because they will be different for each set of nozzles. Up here we have our upper depth probe position, which is it's retracted right now. The lower depth probe is reading retracted right now. So now if you watch the glass, I'll hit start for step, 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 and each time I say step, I'm hitting the start button 1 time. Step, 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 step. Now the nozzle or the depth probe shoe extended into the spacer. Now you can look on your screen and we have a measurement of 0.212. That's reading 0.220. If you're within about 25 thousandths, you're close. It's close enough. It'll be fine. It's always going to vary a little bit. So if, let's say we want to, let's get this, that reads 220, we'll get this a little closer to 220. So we're at 213 right now. So now on our leading side, and this is like as you view it, looking at the sealer. I can change this number up or down so that matches what our depth we read was. So I can go negative 0.56, and that brought it to 225, right? I'll change it to negative 0.565, and now we're at 221. So now we'll watch that. Now, once the next step I hit, the head is gonna go up the unit, and this will measure along that all the way to the top, right? So what you want to watch is this number here as it trends up the unit. So we're at 220, and it might change a little bit as it goes up the unit. So when I hit start, see how it went to about 230 as soon as it started moving? So that's still within tolerance. If it changes a lot, like let's say it went from 220 to like 190, that indicates that you might have too much pressure on the depth probe. The pressure, we run about 10 to 15 pounds on these depth probes. If you look on that valve bank up there, there's a little pressure regulator poking out the side with like a gold screw. It's that bottommost one on the stack. That's where you can adjust the pressure. Once they're set, you typically shouldn't have to adjust them. But that is where you would adjust the pressure for your depth probe. So we read pretty good there. So now I can hit step, 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 step. Now the top and bottom in depth. This depth probe's extended and the bottom one's extended. Now we can look at our measurements here. So we should be at about 200 on the top. We're at 180. So negative 0.55. 200. The bottom one, we're at 215. We should be at 180. I went the wrong way. 196. 186. That's close enough. Like I said, they have a pretty good tolerance in them. Like if you're within 20, 30 thou, like I said, that's good enough for what it's doing. So now just watch it as it trends across on top and bottom. We're pretty good there. Then you go to the trailing side. We're reading 168. On our unit, we wrote 165, so we're actually really good there, so we don't need to adjust that one. And it'll run down and we watch it. Now at this point, I can hit start a bunch of times, and then I'll just hit stop here. At this point, the reason why we turn the sealant off, we can also do it with the sealant on. The benefit to do it with the sealant off is once you make your adjustments, if you feel like you need, because it's really hard to watch that when it's doing the top and bottom at the same time, now you can pick your unit up and rerun that. So in this, let's say the bottom and top, we couldn't watch them both. We grab our unit, set it back here, return to index, main screen, reset, line data, move our data back from sealer 2 to sealer 1 by hitting from, to, move. So now our data is back where the glass is, because anytime across the board on this line, if you move glass, you have to make sure the data matches. Now we could hit step, and we could go back to that screen, and we could repeat the process and watch it again.
And you're just hitting start until it comes up the other end?
Yeah, you just all step mode does is like cycle through the process. So yeah. Like from the beginning of the process of this entire machine in auto, there might be like 40 steps to go from beginning to end. Step mode is just like auto in the fact that instead of just it automatically cycling through everything, it breaks it into steps so you can watch what's going on. It's pretty useful for stuff like this, because if this is in full auto, it's going to be really hard to dial in your depth probes.
So you just do auto and then hit pause?
So if I wanted to just resume in full auto from this point, I can just hit auto and start, and it'll finish its process on its own. The biggest thing on the sealer, the number one thing, if your sealant is looking way underfilled or way overfilled, check your depth probes. I mean, if you, let's say the unit was underfilled on the trailing side, right? Or like, let's say across the board, the whole unit was underfilled. I could go to operator bead adjust, and I could crank up how much sealant with this bead multiplier we're putting in the unit, and I could fill that unit and make it look good. But it's likely because the depth probe is reading improper. So let's say the depth probe is reading 100,000, like 0.1 instead of 0.2. That's a big difference. I come over and I crank up that bead multiplier, it'll fill the unit. But then Davis comes in, fixes the depth probes. Now it's going to be putting way too much sealant in. The first thing you should always look at is your depth probes.
So best practice, depth probe first.
Always the depth probe first. Yeah. These numbers shouldn't have to vary much. It's usually always the depth probes.